Wait, I have a question.
No, no questions. We're just gonna start.
Okay.
I think we should keep it short and sweet. Like you're busy, you got places to be. Things
Okay.
to do. I'm writing. I have a deadline to turn in the final draft of the revised edition of the Upward Spiral.
How's
So
that going?
it's good. Um, like there was like a big deadline a few months ago of where like I had to turn in the first draft, and then the editors took like forever and like gave me back input, and now I have to like turn in the final draft. And like every time I'm like, oh, this just seems like a small change. Like then that triggers all of these other things. Oh, but like really, there's probably new research on this, and I like go down like a Google Scholar rabbit hole of like trying to find like all of the new research, and that that's challenging because like the cutting edge of science is never clear. Like by definition, when you get to sort of the edge of science, it's because, well, some people think it's this thing, and there's evidence for, that this is going on. And other people are like, well, that's crazy. We have evidence that's the opposite, and nobody knows what's going on. So then I get stuck. I'm like, do I even understand any of this? What's happening? And then I have to like talk myself down, being like, well, you wrote a whole book about this, and um like you do know. And then I remember like, right, this writing the first edition felt very overwhelming because I had to like distill all of these like um disagreeing scientists like into a way that made sense, like intuitive sense to me. And like once it made intuitive sense to me, oh, then it's like so easy to just like share that with others. Like, oh, this is how I understand it. This is how it helps me. Um, and so yes, I do have to remind myself, like, right, I don't need to change everything, but there are a few places I'm like, oh yeah, that study, like, there's better evidence now, or like, oh, there's like more stuff that I've learned that I want to make sure to include, like about self-compassion, for example. And so
Mhm.
I use a lot of the same tools that I suggest to people, like reframe it like, oh, you don't have to include these things. Like, what is it that I want? What do I want to include? What do I want to achieve? Anyway, that was a long answer to a short question. I have to finish it
I
this week.
can tell. I can tell you're so excited though, and I'm so excited for you. That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Um, yeah, no, it's I think it's supposed to come out. I mean, it'll take a while. It won't come out till December. But I don't know if I told you this. I'm going to do the audio book.
You're gonna read it yourself?
Yeah, the first time it came out, I guess I wasn't well known enough or wasn't interesting enough that they were like, I was like, oh, could I do the audiobook? And they're like, no, like we can get someone to do that.
You
And
know,
this
because those people are like highly trained.
they are, they are. I mean, the guy who did it was great, but there's part of me was like, "Ah, I wish I had like been able to do it because I feel like it, I don't know, helps you connect more with readers feel more connected to you as well. So this time they they were I was like, oh, like, can I do it? And they're like, well, can you send us a sample? And so I like, okay, I got it. Like a my fancy microphone, and I did a sample, and they're like, oh, we love it. Like, we'd love to have you.
Yeah,
So
that's super cool. It's the best when the author actually gets to do the audiobook.
I agree. I'm glad you agree as well. So yes, well, I said we're busy doing stuff, and we went on a tangent of all the stuff we're busy, or some of the stuff that I was busy about. But I wanted to jump on this call with you because you had some very interesting questions. You were emailing me some questions, and I was going to respond. I'm like, hey, other people could benefit these as well.
Are you referring to the TikTok I saw with the
Yeah,
advice?
you're always so like, oh, by the way, how'd you feel about the TikTok ban? Like that impact your life? Like I know your generation.
Oh,
Uh,
I have I don't share the same opinions as most people my age,
okay.
I feel.
Yeah.
I don't have TikTok and I haven't had
Um,
it for like years because I'm very anti-TikTok.
that's
I think it's terrible. Like I haven't had TikTok for years and I'm addicted to TikTok and I think that's sad.
yeah.
Mm.
Um, it is this is one of the things when I'm coaching people, it's like you can't always change your tendencies, particularly like certain addictive tendencies. But like you don't always need to, as long as you're aware of those tendencies, like you can come up with a better plan so they're not a problem. Like I always used to eat too many cookies. And I remember one time in college, I was like going at the supermarket and I was like just going up and down every aisle. And my girlfriend was like, well, why are you going down that aisle? Like, that's just the cookies. And I was like, oh, I guess you're right. I don't need to walk down that aisle. And it was like this like epiphany of like, oh, right. Why do I eat too many cookies? Because the cookies are in my cabinet. Why are the cookies in my cabinet? Because when I saw them at the supermarket, I was like, ooh, I can buy those and I'll eat those over, several days or weeks. And that thought was wrong, but it was very easy to believe my own BS. It's like, oh, once your habit is triggered, it's really hard to resist the temptation, but it's way easier to avoid the temptation in the first place. And so just recognizing your tendencies, if you can think about it, will just back it up earlier in the process. Like, why I'm wasting so much time on TikTok. Okay, well then don't have it on your phone. And it's way easier to avoid getting sucked into that downward spiral. So it's great that you recognize that about yourself.
Yeah, but I'm still unhappy.
Well, like that's where like one little change isn't going to solve everything. But this is like often what undermines people's changes is that like it's not enough to make positive change. I also like I'm somehow deficient because I still want to use TikTok or whatever. But like that's a sign of your strength that like, yeah, you still want to do it, and yet you figured out a way where you don't it doesn't, ruin your life. So like the fact that you want to do it isn't a mark against you.
It's more like I've discovered a loophole. Now I'm just on Reels.
Well, that's the brain is tricky because like it's often when you find a solution to one thing, then you easily get sucked into something else. And that's where, I mean, when I'm working with people in the upward spiral method, it's really like about noticing those underlying tendencies. Because if you don't notice the underlying tendencies in your unique brain, well, then if it's not one thing, and then it's gonna be another thing, and then it's gonna be another thing, and you like, then you solve this, and then it's that. But if you like, you got to address like the thing that's causing that in the first place, the brain circuit that's triggering that in the first place. Um, but I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation about this, but your question that piqued my interest that I want to talk about now was about worrying about like whether it's um, it's good to have a time to worry. What is exactly? Did you hear it on TikTok, or did you hear a professor talk about it? Or what was going on?
A professor showed us a TikTok of someone
Oh, your professors are just
enabling my addiction.
TikTok. I That would be a lot easier for me if I just like phoned it in. I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna sit over here and I don't even make a PowerPoint. Just like here, I just scroll through my
I know
feed.
it was funny. I don't even know if she has actually utilized that be before. She didn't expand on it at all, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. Because I was like, what? Who would actually do that? That's a weird person thing. But do you do that? Oh, I guess I didn't explain what we're talking about.
Oh,
Um,
right. Sorry, I thought you were talking about showing TikToks in class instead of teaching, but okay, yes, you were asking.
okay, the TikTok was about scheduling a time during the day purely for worrying and stressing or crying or whatever the heck it is, so that you're
Mhm.
not having to do that, throughout the whole day.
Yeah. No, I mean, it seems like a great strategy. Um, I think this is where a lot of people would wonder, like, well, what's the research on that? And like, sometimes I feel like I sound anti-science, where it's like, well, in some instances, like the research doesn't matter because research is about groups of people, and you are not a group of people. You are
Mhm.
a person. So things that work well on groups of people, well, that's a good place to start knowing nothing about yourself, but it still doesn't guarantee whether it would work for you. And
Mhm.
so I take the broader view of science of like, this isn't just about um, following some protocol that was developed based on 100 people randomly selected from around the country. It's about understanding your own unique brain and then using the process of science from there. So like if I know that specific technique would be terrible from like I don't really need it. I'm not distracted by things uh enough. Like I don't need to do that. But if someone's listening, if you've heard the idea, then it sounds like, yeah, that would be a great thing to try for several reasons. We can get into those. But like, was that something that appealed to you?
I'm not sure if it appealed to me. Like I didn't make the decision to try it, but I thought it was interesting because I had just never thought about doing that before because I
Yeah.
just feel all of my emotions when they happen
Right. Well,
all of the time, my whole life.
yeah. So that's the other thing about these kinds of suggestions is like a lot of times people want like, here are the suggestions. Should I do this? Should I not do this? And I like to like understand the principles behind why it works. Because if you understand those principles and master those principles, then you're not like a slave to some protocol or just like following instructions. You can be flexible and understand like, well, is this going to work for me, or tweak it in a way that works better for you. So
Mhm.
like the um, the underlying impetus, behind that approach is this idea like just because you have an emotion doesn't mean you need to let it take over your life. Like
Mhm.
just because you feel sad doesn't mean you need to um, burst into tears right then. Now, this is a nuanced message because most people end up in a black or white, all or nothing approach to this, either one extreme or the other. They think, oh, great. I don't need to feel my emotions. So anytime I have an emotion, I'll just like ignore it. I don't feel like working out. Well, I'm going to shove that down and call myself lazy and go to the gym. I don't feel like, I do feel like crying. So I'm going to tell myself, stop being weak and stop crying. Like, and I'm going to say emotions are pointless and irrelevant. I'm going to shove them to the side. Whereas other people, like, no, emotions are important. They're telling you about your intuition and your deeper connections with other things. And so, like, you have to feel your emotions. And so you have to be guided by your emotions. How can you be intuitive if you're not just like following wherever your emotions are taking you?
Hmm.
And both of those sort of extreme positions lead to problems because the human brain is more complex than that. Like, we're not purely logical, analytical creatures. Like, the emotional parts of our brain evolved first. Like, these are the deeper circuits, and they are connected to our survival. Like, literally, like the hypothalamus, the region that um, is intimately connected with your homeostasis, your ability to survive. Like, that's the center region of the emotional circuit in the brain. Like, we evolved emotions because they help us survive better. They are telling us often about our needs. Like, when you're hungry or thirsty, you can't breathe. When you're in pain, uh, like, that's what your emotions are connected to. And so they're telling you important messages. But we also have this analytical circuit sort of sitting on top of that. And like, that's really helpful too. But the problem is that with emotions, the messages that we're getting are kind of ambiguous. So it's sort of like, um, I sometimes use this analogy with my clients, like, you have a smoke alarm and it goes off. Sometimes that means your house is on fire and you have to, grab your kids and get out as fast as possible, you're going to die. Other times it means that your wife left the toast in the toaster too long, right? Like, okay. So does that mean you should always listen to every alarm and run out of the house as fast as possible, or you should never listen to your alarm and get rid of your smoke alarm and it's bad? Well, no, the smoke alarm is crucial and essential to your safety, but you should also be able to quickly figure out, oh, is this one of those alarms that I should listen to and run out as fast as possible? And it doesn't matter if I'm in the middle of a phone call or whatever. It's like, okay, great. I'm not going to be annoyed that this alarm interrupted me. I'm going to be grateful that it interrupted me and saved my life. Or is this one of those alarms that I can just ignore and be like, oh, well, I'm so glad I have that alarm. I know it's keeping me safe, but I don't need to listen to it right now. And where your emotions, that's what your emotions are like. Like, they're telling you something important, or that something is potentially important that's out of your control, but like, what exactly that is might not be your initial assumption. And so
Hmm.
having, I mean, does that make sense, by the way? Like, do you have any questions about that before?
It makes sense, and I totally agree with you with what you're saying that like I probably don't really understand like the mechanisms behind it, which is like why I'm not understanding really like how it could be beneficial. I mean, I'm understanding more as you're talking, but
Right.
I was thinking I was going to tell you that I have a hard time understanding, what this person means by scheduling a time to worry because I feel like, I'm having my thoughts throughout the day and I feel like I almost have feelings attached to all of my thoughts. And if I schedule a time away, then what am I going to be thinking of? Like,
Well,
what do
right.
I do then?
Well, so that's where it really, that's why it's so important to understand the principles behind these things, as opposed to just like, well, I have to do this um, because someone told me to. Uh, I mean, I feel like that's one of the reasons why I got a PhD in neuroscience in the first place, is like, I want to be able to understand, like, well, what science should I listen to? And like, what can I ignore? Like, I don't want to be dependent on somebody else, like, telling me to do this. I want to be able to understand and figure it out for myself. So, um, like, the best. approach is like when you have an emotion to just be able to quickly recognize the source of that and like address it quickly, or oh, you have some worry and be able to recognize that thought and then just be able to resolve it quickly in the moment so it doesn't build up. And the problem is, like, if you can't do that and you have tons of emotions that are getting in your way, then you're at risk for a downward spiral, because it's good for you to exercise and get work done and get a good night's sleep. But if you have all these worries and anxieties and then it's preventing you from taking any positive actions, then it just snowballs out of control. And sometimes the first step is just recognizing, oh, I have this emotion. I want to worry about this or freak out about this now. I, I'm going to allow myself to worry and freak out about this. Just, I don't need to do it right now. And that sort of breaks this automatic connection that some people get stuck in of like, well, I have these emotions. I have to listen to them because that's the fire alarm. I have to get out of the house. It's like, well, okay, you can listen to the fire alarm and then be like, oh, let me just look in the kitchen. Oh, there's like, there's a smoke coming out of the toaster. Let me just unplug that. I'll figure it out later. Uh,
Hmm.
if you uh, like, and this is particularly for the kinds of anxieties that are just anxiety. That doesn't mean that there's not something deeper going on. But like, if you see that there's a problem, if you see that there's a fire, we have to deal with it, right? Like, it would be counterproductive to be like, oh, there's a fire. Okay, well, I'm not scheduled to fight fires until 3 p.m. So okay, like, you like, if there is an actual problem, like, deal with it. But where many people get stuck is that just like they feel like there's a problem, but they know that there's not a problem. And
Hmm.
so if you feel that there's a problem, there's not a problem. Well, that feeling needs to be addressed at some point, but that doesn't mean you have to do it right this second. And
Hmm.
so if you go extreme, you're like, oh, I can ignore that feeling forever. Well, that's a problem. Or if you go the other way, well, this is a feeling. I have to feel it. I have to do whatever it says. It's like, no, like, if if your analytical brain and your emotional brain are telling you different things, like, well, it feels like this is an urgent problem, but like, I know it's not. Oh, well, then you have a choice to do something about it later. So you just make a plan to deal with this later. I'm like, hey, this is really important. I'm going to deal with it later. Just like if you were, um, if I was on a phone call and my kids burst in the door, oh, my kids have a need. I have to be a good parent. I have to respond to my kids. Well, yes, at some point. It doesn't mean I have to always stop every call to deal with my kids. I can be like, oh, hey, thank you for bringing this to my attention that your art project is due tomorrow or whatever. You know, I'll definitely help you with it. Let's do it in an hour or whatever it is. Like, on the other hand, if they're like bleeding, I'm like, oh, okay, got to get off the call. But like, I can see that it's important, but it's not urgent. I know that there's not an urgent need to take action on it, and therefore I can save it for later.
Hmm.
And that's why I mean I find a lot of smart, uh, successful people with anxiety like have those issues because like they have this anxiety, but they know like, yeah, but I shouldn't really be worried about that. Like, do you ever get stuck worrying about things that like like, that's not a problem?
Yeah, yeah. It feels like there's like two of me, like what I think and what I know, like exactly how you said.
Yeah. Well, it's because different parts of your brain want different things. They evolved at different times for different purposes. And you can't like unlock your full potential by pretending that like one part of your brain doesn't exist, because like your emotional circuits are extremely powerful at um, understanding subtle nuances and probabilistic thinking. Like you can't be as good a leader, as good at connecting with people if your emotional circuits aren't involved. You can't be as good at um, imagination or creativity or motivation if your emotional circuits aren't involved. And so a lot of people, they get stuck because they're like, well, I just need to ignore those emotions all the time because they sometimes get in the way. And then they're like, why aren't I more motivated? Why aren't I more inspired? Uh, and I like to uh, think of emotions sort of like hunger. Like hunger is your brain reminding you that like it's important to eat food. So it's true. Like the limitation that you have that like, well, life would be easier if I never needed to eat food, right? But I do. So like the the faster you recognize and accept your limitations, the better you are um, able to adapt to changing circumstances. Um, Now, it sometimes is annoying or distracting when your brain is telling you about how hungry you are, and you're like, I got this deadline, I got to do this, like I don't have time to eat lunch right now. uh well, that's fine. It's not helpful to get mad at yourself for being hungry. Like it's just your brain running like, hey, you need to eat food. But just because you're hungry does not mean that you need to eat right now.
Hmm.
uh you can recognize like, hey, I feel really hungry, and I also know that like, well, even if I didn't eat for a day or a week, I wouldn't die. Right? Okay, well, I wouldn't want to do that. But like I know that, oh, there's an Amber Alert. Uh this is like one of those alerts. Uh Highway patrol. Well, I'm not driving on the highway, so I can't do anything about it. So that's an alarm I can safely ignore. Um, but like hunger uh is like, okay, I know if I don't eat anything all afternoon or all morning, then I'm going to start to, you know, get foggy or whatever. So I need to eat something at some point, but not, I don't have to eat anything in the next 45 minutes before this presentation is due or whatever. So I
Hmm.
can say, oh, thank you, Brian, for reminding me that I need to eat food at some point. I am gonna eat food. I'm gonna address that concern that you keep reminding me about. I'm gonna do something about that in 1 hour. And once your brain knows that like you are going to do something about it, then it stops distracting you with it. Just like my kids wandering through the door, once I'm like, hey, like I need help with my art project, or I want to watch TV. When I tell them, oh yeah, oh that's really important. Yes, we're going to do that in 1 hour. Here's the plan. Like they just want to know that there is a plan to address the need. And so if you have these worries, you need to come up with a plan to address the need. You don't have to address the need right now, but if you never have a plan to address the need, then your brain is going to keep distracting you with like that, hey, you know this thing you're trying to ignore? It's kind of important. Like we need to figure it out at some point. And if you can just quickly say, like, yep, totally. Um, I just have to do this work right now. So let's cry about it. Um, at lunchtime. That'll be more convenient for me. And like getting angry at yourself isn't going to help because like, well, now you're angry and also feeling these other emotions. But you can be compassionate with yourself, like, oh, I know. Yeah, you really heartbroken or really upset. Like, yes, let's think about that. Let's feel those emotions. Like, let's turn on some music and just like get overwhelmed by them, but like, let's do that between, 1 and 1:15. Okay.
Yeah. So when you're actually in that time of, between 1 and 1:15, what are you supposed to be doing with these
Oh, I
emotions?
don't, I don't
Just,
know.
oh, you
Like,
don't know? Oh, great.
like, but I mean, like what often happens, by the way, and this is related to something I was talking about in the group earlier this week. But what often happens is you're like, no, I'm not going to think about it. I'm never going to think about it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to be sad about it. Whatever these things are, I'm not going to feel about it anytime. And then you're trying to fall asleep, or you're like so exhausted you fall asleep, and then you like wake up in the middle of the night, and then your brain is like, well, isn't now a good time? Like you're like, no, now's not a good time. And so like if you're trying to ignore those emotions the whole day, oftentimes your only time you're unable to ignore them is at sleep, and then that compounds it because you're still trying to ignore them, and now it just disrupts your sleep. And um, so there's just like a little side note, like it is important to experience them at some point. Ideally, as we talked about earlier, like you can be able to be reflective and notice them, and either ignore them or deal with them as needed, like in the moment, and then they don't build up. But if they're building up so much because you're ignoring them so much, then you need to have a time when you do something. And what exactly you do will be different for different people, like listening to music or painting or playing the piano, or maybe some people, when they just decide, yeah, I need to cry now, okay, they can just start crying and it's helpful and they feel better. um, Maybe it's journaling. These are all helpful ways to get in touch with your emotions. Maybe it's talking to someone about it.
So you're
Like,
saying that you have to actually do something. You can't just like think
well,
or
you can. That's
feel
what I'm
how.
saying. You can think like sometimes, but like it depends how in touch with your emotions you are. Like sometimes, like, okay, I'm just gonna allow myself to actually experience the grief that I'm feeling, or experience the anxiety that I'm feeling. And some people, like, once they just stop for a moment and allow themselves, then it's overwhelming and they cry. Other people, it might take a little bit more action to start experiencing those feelings. But where this is problematic is that, like, things like journaling or listening to music or whatever, things that in scientific studies have shown, hey, like this is helpful for people. Well, they're just a tool. And so if every day or every week you're okay, well, 3 o'clock is the time that I cry, or like before I go to bed, I journal for 20 minutes or whatever. Like, yeah, that's helpful. It's better than doing nothing, but it would be better at some point to investigate and be curious about, like, why do I keep having all these emotions that build up and build up and build up, that I'm ignoring for so long, that I need to then schedule this time for?
Mhm,
So like, as a regular practice, there's often a better way to try and address the root cause. Like, as a short-term solution, like, hey, I'm having all these emotions this week, but I still have to, take the kids to school and like figure out what summer camps they're going to do and like get all my work done, whatever. Like, I'm just going to deal with these emotions, at 3 o'clock today or whatever, just for like this, to get through this week or whatever it is. But like, as a long-term approach, that's usually not the solution. You need to recognize, like, well, where are these emotions coming from, and why can't I just deal with them quickly in the moment and know which ones I can ignore and which ones I need to do something about. Uh,
mhm.
and in times, and maybe you've experienced this yourself, that like most of your life, you're probably able to do that. You're like, oh yeah, like because you're an intuitive person, like you're aware of your emotions, but you're not completely controlled by them. And most of your life, you can probably, you know, listen to your emotions and then, act on them or ignore them as needed. And it's not a problem. Is that right?
Sure, most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Most of the time. Right. Except it's just sometimes I have a lot of shit to do and I need to just like, I also have a lot of emotions and they're getting in the way of each other. So then I say, okay, well, so this time I'm just going to schedule it for later. Um, but like, if you don't have that reflective ability, the ability to know, is this a fire alarm that I need to run out of the house or is this just toaster smoke that I can ignore? Then
Mhm.
you're going to constantly be building up all of these emotions that need to be dealt with. Whereas if you are able to recognize those things quickly, then you don't have that buildup of emotions. And so for most people who are good at it, like you're good at it, I'm good at it. Like it's only necessary, it's only a problem when there's a lot of shit happening, when you have a ton of deadlines and also like, you're in an argument with your friend and also like you slept terribly and you forgot to exercise and like all, and then everything, you know, comes to a head. You need a plan to deal with those emotions, not just go wherever your moment to moment emotions take you. But that plan probably isn't, we'll just ignore them forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think I also emailed you about this goes hand in hand with your fire alarm
Oh,
example.
uh-huh.
But when the fires had started in the Palisades or whatever, everyone was getting that watch duty app.
Right.
I got that app and I was like so worried and concerned. I wanted to be in the know of what was going on. So I had my notifications on and after like an hour I was like this is not good for me. And I had to turn it off. But I think that's what I should have done. I think I should have turned off my notifications,
Yeah.
but I did not return to like that fear and that worry and that like need to be in the know. Instead, I am now not in the know. You informed me of a fire that I had never heard of,
Right.
and
Well, and you live to tell the tale. Well, because that's in some ways, that's like, oh, if this alarm, like alarms that are false alarms, not necessarily false alarms, but alarms that I don't need to do something about, the more I have alarms that I don't need to do something about in my life, the more that actually puts me in danger. Because then I get used to ignoring all of those alarms. They're just triggering a lot of anxiety. Get used to ignoring them. And then I don't actually listen to the alarms that are most important. And so that's where it's important to notice your own emotional reaction. Like for me, I had the alerts. It didn't freak me out. It was comforting to know what was happening. But if for someone else, it's not comforting to know what's happening, well, then turn off the alerts or you'll miss the ones that are most important because if there was something that was actually important, well then you'd probably hear from your friends or in some other way. Now if you're very close to the fire, yeah, you need to keep the alerts on because there's actual danger. But if you're like, oh, I know that I'm not in danger right now, but it feels bad, okay, well then you sort of have to know your own tendencies. You have to calibrate it for yourself. And that's you did exactly what you should do. Well, I thought it was a good idea and I tried it and like, ooh, that made my anxiety worse. Okay, great. I stopped it and you just needed a different plan. Like, okay, maybe I'll just check every few hours or, I'll talk to people and that's perfectly reasonable because you aren't in immediate danger.
Mhm. It's just scary to think about like all of the things that I do that for and all of the fires that are going on that I don't know about, you
I'm going
know?
to make it even scarier for you. There are so many terrible things that could happen to you that you don't think about.
But I try though. I think I have like this general anxiety or something because I try to worry about things because I think that they need to be worried about.
Right. Well, but that's the thing is like some things need to be worried about. And when you have worry or anxiety, it is not like it's problematic when you judge yourself and be like, I shouldn't have any of these worries. That's dumb. They're all stupid. I shouldn't worry or be anxious at all. Well, then you're in more danger. There are things that you should worry about and feel anxious about because it helps you take action and do something about it, protect yourself. The key is having is the calibration, is having your the amount of concern and worry be related to how important it actually is and your ability to do something about it. That's why like the main tool that I use in my clients that I call the important controllables matrix. It's really just about being clear about what's most important to you and what you actually have control over. And when you're clear on those two things, then you can reprogram your anxiety to like, oh, these are the things actually I need to worry more about. as like as and these are things I don't have to care about at all. I can ignore them. But like when you are in danger is when you're something is actually a problem, but you're not thinking about it at all. Uh, like texting and driving, for example. Texting and driving is so dangerous precisely because it doesn't feel dangerous at all. Like, whereas going on, the 10-meter diving board, it's not as dangerous as it feels. The feelings are important and relevant, but like you need to be able to balance. Like, oh, is this one of those things that it just feels dangerous, but it's not, and I can ignore it? Or is this one of those things that's the opposite? It doesn't feel dangerous at all, but I know it's actually dangerous. So I have to use my analytical brain to change my actions because my emotions aren't going to do it for me. And
Mhm.
your emotions and your logical parts of your brain are telling you they're like viewing the world through different lenses, and it's helpful to take both of those into account. Just like sometimes it's helpful to wear infrared night vision goggles, and other times when it's daytime, like you don't need them, right? Like you have both of those abilities, so you just need to know, like, oh, when should I be using my night vision goggles, and when should I not be using my night vision goggles?
Mhm.
But the answer is not never or always. And that's where this is that's that sort of principle behind this. Should you wait to worry? um, but yeah, hopefully that cleared things up, and hopefully people found that helpful. Was that
I
insightful?
cer- I certainly did. I'm gonna try it.
Yeah,
Reluctantly, I'm gonna try
yeah, you can
it.
definitely try it. Like I mean, for me, like I would like I guess for me, I do that automatically. Like I go for a walk, and going for a walk, sometimes I don't listen to music, sometimes I do listen to music. Sometimes listening to music helps you experience the emotions that you're already experiencing. Great. Sometimes just like letting your mind wander. Ooh, that you start to realize like, oh crap, I was worried about this thing I didn't realize. Like if you have already have moments in your day where like things are a bit slower, or you don't judge yourself for feeling emotions, well, then it can happen more organically. And some people like, no, my like stuff is too packed or scattered or whatever that I don't do it organically. Okay, well, so then you make a plan for it. But um, uh, yeah, it seems like a great plan. So I'm glad we could investigate.
But now you're making me think that you're right. I am already doing that. Kind of. I just didn't know it. Okay, this is a big problem is that I don't know myself all that well.
There you go. Now's your opportunity. But the way that you know yourself better is by trying things, not just by sitting there and thinking about it. Like sometimes I can just sit there and think about it, and then I'm like, oh, that's the answer, right? But just because you're a smart person doesn't mean you can figure out everything just by thinking about it. This is how science works. Sometimes you can just go on Google Scholar or think about it and do some calculations and you know the answer. Other times you're like, after all my calculations, I think this is the answer. But then you
Mhm.
have to do an experiment. That is, you have to take action that has uncertain results. And then you will learn more. And then you can incorporate that in. And so you should absolutely like think and reflect. But if you're like, oh, I don't know, well, then do an experiment that is take action. And then you will find out like, oh, either that helped more or it didn't help or was like the same. Okay. Like now you know more information. So that's why it's helpful to follow that curiosity. If you're like, oh, I think that is something that might work, well, then try it. And if it doesn't work, don't be like, I'm such an idiot. Why would I thought that would work? Like, it's perfectly reasonable that it would work as long as you, and, but then sometimes as you're doing it, you're like, oh, you know what? This helped me realize, like, I'm already doing this. I don't need to do this. Perfect. Like, but that's where it's so important to take action, even in the face of uncertainty, because if your default is, well, let me just sit there and think about it more, then you're never taking action to gain new information. And then you just are stuck in the anxiety.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I'm like, we could always talk about this stuff. I was like, maybe we could talk about this for like 15 or 20 minutes. It's like, nope, we always talk about it for long. But like,
That was gonna be my
I
question
enjoy,
in the beginning. I was like, how are we gonna do this quickly?
I'm not, I won't take that personally. But like, part of me is like, right, but people like want to know the details about these things. So I'm glad we can go in depth. And it's always been a pleasure. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening.